bottomless totes, or no gutter. So it was totally functionless. Anything you put in it was just
There we go.
it was just for the graphics. And then another was like the handle was like so long.
But have you seen the one for CCAM?
No.
The one for CCAM, it's like it's basically like it's for collaboration and media.
So why are you having a duffel bag?
Why are you asking? I can put my whole umbrella. Just because you don't have one, you don't understand the value.
I'm just,
You could make like a Mobius strip tote where there's like a handle that goes to tote or something. So you kind of becomes like a two-person wearable sculpture.
You're wasting your talent on Curator.
Yes.
You're going to product design.
Yeah, I have to make like conceptual products that will never
Exactly.
Well, welcome. Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah, thank you to everyone. As a researcher, curator, art worker, and I am a part of Archive Books, who is co-hosting this presentation today. Archive is a community of practitioners collaborating across languages, visuality, archives, and perpetuation of coloniality and knowledge. And Archive is invested in unweaving repressive narratives and reclaiming the archive itself as a tool. Fair to each other, so check us out at booth B12. Sorry. Cool. This feels solid. There's a bass in my voice. What kind of brought this project together came through kind of a presentation of two books by each of these publishers, Where's Africa, which was edited by Emmanuel Admasu and Anita N. Bateman and designed by the lovely Nancy Mutiti, and the forthcoming Ebish book by Luvuyo, Equiano, Nyawose. And we are kind of thinking about bringing these two books in conversation, along with wonderful G. Wesley's ongoing project, Afrophone Reading Room, which represents a number of contemporary publications, as well as rare editions by African publishers that reveal how publishing offers an alternative space for curatorial and editorial practices. And just generally, I think all of these projects and these wonderful panelists that I get to moderate, their work kind of unfolds at this space of thinking about how narratives, ways of knowing, ways of thinking from across the continent and across the diaspora really beautifully trouble kind of our notions of publications, of knowledge transfer, of dissemination and infant genre, and also kind of think about how archives and libraries can create counter spaces or anti-spaces and work through resistance, refuge, and channels for histories that center erased narratives. And in thinking about today, I recently heard this quote from this activist and artist, Avram Finkelstein, who was a part of the ACT UP AIDS movement. And they was a part of creating this kind of publication called New York War Crimes, which took the formation, I don't know if some of you are familiar, of a publication that looked exactly like the New York Times, but was trying to raise awareness and also kind of challenge how the New York Times was not properly addressing the lives lost during the AIDS crisis. And in a conversation with the current iteration of New York War Crimes, which is doing really amazing work, thinking about the complicity and culpability of the US and how the Times is manufacturing consent for war, exploitation, and genocide, when they were asking Finkelstein, why did you decide to inhabit this medium and modality of the New York Times paper and replicate it, he beautifully says, I'm thinking about stealing access to the voice of authority, which is just an amazing phrase, but I think really makes me think about your three practices, about how you all are kind of inhabiting these modalities that have been instrumentalized in normalizing and codifying projects of colonization, erasure, and anti-Blackness, and instead you're doing something different through design, technology, archives, and publishing. So I think I'm really excited for this conversation to think about how your work is sitting within these spaces and stealing the authoritative voice and doing something different with them. And so I'm gonna quickly introduce you all and then turn it over for you all to present. I'll ask some questions and then hopefully we can get some questions from the crowd. And now I'm realizing, Luvuyo, I did not populate your bio, but I will very quickly have it here. So Luvuyo Equiano Nyawose is a South African artist, curator, and filmmaker. He's the editor of the forthcoming anthology, Ebish, published by Archive Books. Nyawose is a PhD student in the Department of Modern Culture and Media at Brown University. His interests include critical and post-colonial theory, political philosophy, modern contemporary art, Black studies, film, and media studies. And the wonderful G. Wesley here is an arts organizer born in Monrovia, Liberia, and based in New York, where he works as a curatorial assistant at the Department of Media and Performance at the Museum of Modern Art. Prior to joining MoMA, Wesley held roles as a program director at Recess, a curatorial fellow at the Sculpture Center, and a cultural curatorial fellow at the Institute of Contemporary Art, and was a visiting instructor at Bard College and an adjunct faculty in the curatorial practice MFA at the Maryland College of Art. Wesley is co-founder and board member of Ulysses, a nonprofit art bookshop based in Philadelphia. His work explores the relationship between publics and publications and how independent artists' initiatives incubate new modes of curatorial and artistic practice. And last but definitely not least, Nontsikelelo Mutiti is a Zimbabwe-born visual artist and educator. She's invested in elevating the work and practices of Black people's past, present, and future through a conceptual approach to design, publishing, archiving practices, and institution building. Mutiti holds a diploma in multimedia from Zimbabwe Institute of Visual Arts, an MFA from the Yale School of Art, and the concentration on graphic design, where Mutiti is now the director of the Graduate Studies for Graphic Design at Yale School of Art. And she has held academic positions at the Zimbabwe Institute of Visual Arts, SUNY Purchase College, and VCO Art at the Virginia Commonwealth University. And with that, Luvuyo, would you like to?
Okay, hi. I'm Luvuyo, and I will just briefly contextualize the anthology and then briefly touch on it before, the questions. So the anthology comes from, is built upon a body of work, ongoing multimedia project with the same title, Ebish, which means at the beach, which responds to articulating Black oceanic presence, specifically within South Africa and more largely within the histories of the Indian Ocean. While I was doing research, I realized that within the sort of formal state archives, Blackness is always footnoted when we discuss notions of the histories of the Indian Ocean. And of course, in the contemporary social practice in South Africa, the beach, like many other spaces, is a contested site. And so I spent 3 years rigorously looking at pictorial archives and other forms of media, and realized and developed a creative body of work on film photography and drone photography. And then I realized that that's just not enough. I needed to sort of do more. I'm just gonna skip through the images really quickly. And so that's where the anthology project sort of emerged. I wanted to bring in chorus various perspectives, poetic, academic, and personal accounts on what does it mean to be Black at the beach, and so how we engage with the ocean and the beach, specifically within the South African context, but also to sort of re-articulate our engagements within the histories of the Indian Ocean, as I've said. And so I approached people who I was around, starting with my mentor and then supervisor, Dr. Nomusa Makubu, and then some friends who are poets, as well as just like writers. And then, yeah, the project came to be. I self-funded the project from sales that I made through the series, and it was a really it was my first time really working as an editor, which was deeply enriching. The anthology doesn't come from like anywhere. It's really well placed in a tradition of publishing in South Africa. In the tradition of like early drum magazines, Stuff Writer, as well as the work of Daniel Morolong, Santo Mufugeng, Andrew Shabangu, and the scholarly work of Begi Zizwe Peterson, Nomusa Makubu, Nontobeko Ntombela. And so in doing this work, I really wanted the reader to have different entry points. They are like sort of scholarly inquiries on the beach and the ocean. There's also like different languages, writing in different languages, and also like poetic and personal engagements with it. Yeah, so that is my spiel.
Sorry, as I transition, I think this is what I want. Oops, this is not what I want. I want Chrome. Okay, cool. Hi everyone, I'm G. I'll try to speak into the microphone, which is sometimes a challenge for me. I am presenting on a project called Afrophone, and the images that you're seeing now kind of are cycling through two presentations of this project. One that was in 2022, that was at an institution in the south of France called Luma Foundation, and then another that are kind of the darker images that'll come probably towards the end of this, that are from a presentation last year, I guess, that was at Pioneer Works at the Press Play Fair. Afrophone is a project dedicated to contemporary African independent art publications, and I think we can kind of talk about the complexities and nuances and contestations around all of those terms, independent African art publications. And the project really started in its earliest phase in 2000, I would say even like 2016, 2018. Prior to working on this project, I was a part of I was a part of a group of people who founded an arts space in Philadelphia called Ulysses, named after the Mexican artist Ulysses Ciarán. And the space is a bookshop and a curatorial platform, and we sell art books and independent art publications. in the course of working on that project, this bookshop Ulysses, we mostly purchased books from artists and who, like the kinds who are exhibitors at places like this, as well as distributors who, offer publications to retailers on wholesale. And in building our inventory, we followed a lot of our kind of curiosities and pursuits, artist books, small democratic multiples, our cultural periodicals. But in the course of working on the project, a lot of the inventory that we brought together was, from publishers based in the US, North America, as well as Northern Europe in particular. So we were really thinking about, some of the absences and gaps in terms of representation within the space of global contemporary art, publishers working on the African continent or who were Afro-diasporic. And in the course of that, I got really excited about this idea of like how to intervene in that space. I really loved your introduction and thought, about so much of how it sort of centered this idea of urgency and how we can which is something that's really guided a lot of my work of like thinking about, okay, what's absent, what's missing in a cultural ecology, in an arts infrastructure. And specifically, one of the guiding sort of ideas for my work is this idea of like curatorial, institution building as a curatorial act. That's a line from the work of the curator Sarah Rifke. And this has like particular importance for me as someone who is has always considered myself as a bit of a provincial. I was born in this like small country in West Africa that part of what used to be called the third world and is called the emerging economies now, and like grew up in like Rust Belt Appalachia and the post-industrial Midwest. So a lot of my access to culture and arts came through publications, so I think about them too as these like transgeographic forms that allow us to kind of interact with people who we don't see necessarily on a day-to-day basis. And in that line, Afrophone exists as a reading room that continues to evolve. In 2022, brought together a group of about 12 to 15 publishers from imprints like Africada, this incredible bilingual cultural magazine, Cult Editions that you see there, this risograph studio based in Cape Town, and then projects as well like Pamphlet, this architecture zine that you kind of see on the table on the left. And in the convening in 2022, we also had like a kind of public program that focused on some of the questions and concerns that defined the work of these publishers. And you can see some images from that. Nonsi is there as well. And we created this reading room as well that included the publications that people could kind of go to LUMA, the institution, and kind of read the publications that were there for this small period of time during the book fair. And then, some of the publishers we were working with, like Nancy, also had incredible materials that there were just kind of a few remaining archive copies for. So it was a great opportunity to sort of exhibit in the space some work that was there as well. One thing that I think is important to kind of say about the project too is like as we were developing, as I was developing it with Luma Foundation, this question came up of like what to call it, and like there's an incredible art book fair that happens at the CARA Biennial that maybe some of you will go to, called the African Art Book Fair, that was founded by Pascal Obola, who founded Africada magazine and was one of the invited publishers to Afrophone. And her publications are still a part of the reading room, there's a way in which, Pascal's project is a much broader view. There were so many more invited participants than we were able to include and invite to Arles in the south of France for this project. I think we kind of like, one kind of consideration for thinking about what to call the project also was this idea of language. Africa is the most like culturally and genetically and linguistically complex and diverse continent in the world, and home to thousands of languages and and many global languages, right, like English in France And so we were thinking as well about something that could kind of function across kind of French and English in particular in the context where this project was hosted. So we arrived at this idea of like Afrophone, sort of thinking about like this portmanteau of the idea of like so much of the African continent is kind of defined by linguistic associations like Francophone, Anglophone, but what would it mean as like a conceptual prompt to think about Afrophone? And kind of like African speech, African language, you know, and African textualities, and then also this idea of like the colophon as like a space in a publication where you kind of see the credits of the people who contributed to it. So like, what does it mean to think about this as a space where we kind of forefront the cast of figures and contributors who are shaping what it is. And maybe, I mean, I'll probably should wrap up there. I think I'm nearing 7 minutes, but maybe the last thing I want to say is just about this idea of like terminology. Like I think, yeah, I've always loved this term independent art publications as a kind of umbrella term that can contain art books and artist books and artist multiples. And one of the reasons I love that is like the idea of it's like radical inclusivity, but also the way that like independent as a term, you know, is one that has multiple valences. Like, you know, you're looking at publications, kind of historical African publications that were included in a reading room that were created at this moment of like post-independence, in which like these publications were part of like cultivating this like publications like Transition and Drum were part of like cultivating this like kind of post-independence educated public and asserting what it meant to be African or belong to those nations, newly formed states. And then there's also this idea in the kind of contemporary context that we're working in as well, where like independence can refer to these like informal economic strategies, you know, like you were talking about Luvuyo, of kind of like using sales in order to fuel this project that you wouldn't otherwise be able to support, or barter economies, or sort of projects that kind of shun commercial interests. So I like this idea of like the independence of art publications having both a kind of political and like kind of like almost like radical anti-imperial association, but also this idea of its relationship to working in ways that create structures that are necessary and urgent and at times alternative. But yeah, I've gone over time a little bit, so I'm like the person who's like, I'll state a time and then never states the time in the panel. I'll be short, and then there's never time. But I'll close this up if I can. Maybe I'll just X out. I don't think I'll need it again. Sorry, I've forgotten how to use Chrome. Oh yeah, save me, please.
This means I don't have to present. Takes 3 publishers to run a computer. Hi everyone, I'm Mutiti, and I will be talking about this book, but through other projects, because I really feel that as I've been building my practice as a designer, independent publisher, artist, the values and techniques continue to build on each other, and kind of many of the things I've done in the past, I realized this week whilst deciding what to talk about in relationship to West Africa, that they actually culminate in this publication, and I'm sure this publication will kind of inform its kind of descendants to come. I'm going to read this quote that is by Dambudzo Marechera, a very important literary figure from Zimbabwe, lived a very short life, but made an amazing contribution to the landscape of our community back home, really teaching us what it meant to be a radical individual in our contemporary time. Marechera passes away when I'm 5 years old, returns back to Zimbabwe after being in the UK on a scholarship at Oxford University, was expelled for attempting to burn down the library, and then, came back to Zimbabwe without a passport, so could never leave after that, and lived almost as a destitute individual in the city center, and became like a part of like urban legend within the capital city of Zimbabwe. One very interesting thing in Mariache's biography is that he was arrested the night before the first African book fair to be held. Ever, it was in Harare in the early 80s, and he was arrested because he was such an outspoken character, and there was going to be so much media, and Zimbabwe was newly independent. We gained independence in 1980 and returns to Zim a year or two later. They wanted to kind of silence him and make sure that there wasn't a ruckus at this book fair, that the book fair was supposed to be very like quiet and palatable, in the space that had just kind of fought its independence. So kind of interesting character. But I'll read this quote and then continue. Mariache said, "I have been an outsider in my own biography, in my country's history, in the world's terrifying possibilities." Part of what made me interested in publishing and design is that there were so many books about Africa, but very few publications that were produced by Africans that were visible on the global stage and also used as the seminal texts to describe our own situations. Zimbabwe is known as the country with the highest literacy rate in Africa, and we have so many books written about us, but they're written by scholars, maybe some from the institution that I'm working at right now, Yale University. They're written by people from Eastern Europe who come to our spaces and interview us for 2 weeks or 2 months, even 2 years, and then become experts on our narratives. Those narratives are encapsulated in print, a very authoritative format that anyone who sees content in this book believes it. So I really felt that I needed to get involved in publication making, and it's kind of like a repatriation project. It's a form of cultural recovery, and also being able to speak about things on our own terms. It's also a very selfish endeavor. It's me trying to recover things that I know I should have had but didn't, and then also a gift to communities and people like me. And my approach to design is not very sophisticated. I really believe that 2 pages are 2 spaces that can speak to each other, and I really design across the spread, in terms of conversation and communication. I think about sequence and what sequence can tell us and what tonality can tell us. It's not so much about layout, it's about the stuff and what happens when you bring it together. And sometimes it's like in harmony, and sometimes it's kind of at odds, and those contrasts are important. That's what reading is, being able to acknowledge different voices and find a space where you can articulate some sense of reason, some sense of like a position based on what you've brought to the publication and what the publication is saying to you, what the authors are saying to you. So here's my very first publication that I made out of grad school. Our grad program at Yale is known for training people to make like really amazing publications, but I couldn't make any books there. I was being taught about certain strategies that had always worked to kind of flatten the voice of my community, the image of my community, all these very specific grids, these tiny little thumbnails, everything looked indexical, everyone became a subject. All the white space that was supposed to be so sophisticated, and I'm coming from a space which has got so much flavor, so many tonalities, that some of the grit is just part of who we are. And but I was being shown examples of work that were kind of I was supposed to emulate, that were so pristine and so tight. And I'm coming from a really messy place. So African Heritage Salon Reader comes out of my long-standing research of thinking about the African hair salon in diaspora and the places that we make for ourselves when we're abroad to kind of feel a sense of home. This is what I do with my publication design practice and any of the independent publishing. It's really about homemaking. And it's really about bringing in different kinds of voices, academic voices, street level photography, This writing on the facade of the salon, Shades of Elegance, and all these other photographs I've collected of these similar spaces, always pointing out to the community, trying to edify them. Images of workshops, instructions on how to code, and all these different kinds of things for me are important. They kind of build a multi-layered story. The polyvocal is very important, and that's one thing that Where's Africa does, is so many different interviews. There are also, there's representation by the Black Reconstruction Collective, who are a group of Black American architects, or Black architects based in the US, who came together after a really groundbreaking show at MoMA to become a collective and to really push for representation, not just in the field, but also within institutions that collect and present architecture. This is a map of Marichera's work, of Marichera's kind of life in downtown Harare. When I was working on this project with Tinashe Mushakavanu, he had studied Marichera at PhD level. It was part of his dissertation. And I was really thinking about how do we make some of that content available to everyday people. Not everyone is going to go to a library and check out your dissertation. And a dissertation that becomes a book is also has a very specific tone. So taking content and trying to shift what it feels like, what it looks like, trying to think about different ways to articulate the same thing has been a part of not just a publishing practice, but also how I kind of think about taking up content and then re-representing it to an audience. What does color do? What does form do? What does the way you place images do to make people feel close to the content, and to also make it feel irresistible for people that might not care about the content. I try to tell my students that even serious content deserves to look sexy. This is us at Curator Library in Johannesburg, South Africa, a really phenomenal collective. They run an after-school program where young people write their own curriculum for what they want to learn in those in-between moments after they've finished formal school. They go to the space, and then the Curator help them to kind of bring those kind of skills together, find people to come and demonstrate the things that they want to learn. And they have an amazing space that we set up a sort of self-imposed residency there, and used their Rizzo to produce this piece. We also brought our community members together to assemble the zine and to kind of think about Marichera's life. And it was amazing to do this work in Johannesburg and have so many Zimbabweans come out, to really, the content of the publication pulled to itself the people that it was, really made for. So really thinking about audience building and ways to build community and give people a touch point. When Zimbabweans are in South Africa, especially the space of Johannesburg, we often tend to not seek each other out, or we try to suppress our identity because of all the xenophobic attacks. We want to try to not allow people to know that you're Zimbabwean. Now, I can pass because of my name. It's actually a Xhosa name. But if you have a name that is clearly Shona, which is a different identity, but so identifiable as Zimbabwean, you can get easily targeted. So being able to produce these kinds of activities really is kind of again, homemaking, pointing to people this is actually for you. You can come to this. You don't have to come with your guard up, and we can speak freely. We don't need any other interlocutors to translate on our behalf or filter out what we need to say. I think I'll end here with some writers can give you 2 heartbeats, because it points to, I'll very quickly show Asiko after this, but some writers points to what you were saying about taking up the voice of authority or stealing back, that repatriation. This whole publication is built out of looking at interviews and academic texts where Zimbabweans have been the subject, where academics or interviewers for magazines and newspapers have gone out and tried to understand the kind of social situation or somebody's work and how it relates to how they're trying to reflect the national narrative. And they become these amazing documents that the people back home who were interviewed never get to read. This really came out of Tinashe's time doing his PhD when he was being asked to, he was writing about Marechera, but he was asked to cite Freud and other European precedent, and he decided to go back home and interview other Zimbabwean writers that would have interacted with him to kind of shift what that authoritative voice is, and to shift who the intellectual was, and to include them as people that can continue to be referenced in this individual's narrative, to continue to be cited, because that's also how we build what becomes a reliable source and what becomes knowledge production. It's about what's in this book, what is printed that people can keep going back to and reproduce in relationship to something else they're trying to say, whether they agree or they make an argument against. So publishing is not a passive thing. You know, books can look so tame, but I've said at a book fair last year, a book is a fight, you know. So for me, it's part of getting engaged in that battle, having something to stand up with and be like, hey, yeah, okay, you're saying this, but we also have something to offer. Let's joust here. And so, yeah, in this publication, we scrape, you know, the quotes from those, the direct quotes that are said by these authors and bring them back together. It's kind of like a fictitious conversation, but using real words. We've organized this book according to theme, everything from what it was like to be in exile, people's childhoods, what the education system is like in Zimbabwe, all these different kinds of things. And so many tonalities as well, newspaper clippings. This is Bob Marley, a note about Bob Marley coming to Zimbabwe during our independence celebrations and some people that he hung out with playing soccer during the day. This is the way we actually interact with publications in Zimbabwe, because most of our bookstores have been closed. Most publications that we use in schools are bootlegs, Xeroxes of publications that maybe were being sold in the early 2000s, stopped being sold in the early 2000s, and you buy them as bootleg copies on the street corner. This is like a bottom right, I think, bottom whatever it is for you guys. And so, like, and then this is a music score of a very important song that we sing at harvest time. Always kind of layering, thinking about how we talk about context. I'll just end with this publication, very important publication that was commissioned by BC Silva for CCA Lagos, that was talking about curatorial practice, reflecting 6 years of a workshop that she ran in 5 different countries, where African artists, Black artists, Black curators could come together in these spaces and talk about contemporary African art on their own terms. And it was quite experience for me to travel to the continent to be a facilitator and to really understand how so much of my understanding of the rest of the continent was mediated through my experience of being abroad, looking back at the continent, that I hadn't actually been in those spaces. And so, you know, BC even just bringing us all together in that way was like so revolutionary. The publication has these very specific shapes in the gutter that kind of displace, it kind of fights with the content. The content has to acknowledge that that figure exists. That kind of came from my experience being in Mozambique, a Lusophone country that my father originates from, but I'd never been to. I don't speak a lick of Portuguese, and understanding how I was really contending. There was a lot of discomfort, and me having to understand where I was and grapple with that. That process of recovery was really kind of uncomfortable one that I had to work for. And that also, you know, we take it for granted that we are insiders. Just because I'm Black African, we think we're all insiders. We don't actually know that much about us. So always kind of also trying to highlight the specificity of each of our experiences. And so just to close off, if you can look at 2 books at once, which I think is a good way to look at books. Where's Africa is also using some of these tropes. The African Hair-Braiding Salon reader has got this spine, that spiral spine that comes through the center, through the gutter, because I often find books that are bound, like perfect bound or sewn, feel so complete. I wanted something that felt like we could continue to add to the story. and also something that really talked about, things coming together. There's so many voices in this publication. There's a bunch of gatefolds in the book which kind of point out the individuals who are not visual artists here, but who are architects, and we kind of use those gatefolds to kind of present work in a more spatial way. And my goal for this cover of the publication was not to have the title on the cover, but publishers always want it for marketing. Sorry, CARA. I think it was maybe more a DAP thing. But the goal was to have this landscape, sorry if they're here, to have this landscape that people could just contend with and think about, like texture and tonality, and not what you automatically think, that you've been socialized to think of when you think about Africa: red, yellow, green, triangles, brown, that we actually have so many different kinds of atmospheres. The inside of the cover, where I wanted us to to be the first place we encounter, the title, is where you find the table of contents. You have to actually unwrap the whole book to find the table of contents. It goes all the way through the back. And it is a gradient from midnight all the way through to sundown. The sky in Harare, Zimbabwe is such an effervescent color when it is, when the sun is going down. And there's some things about home which you can never see anywhere else. So when people are interacting with a publication that's about that space, I think they should get some of that flavor. I think it doesn't make sense for me to work in any other way. I gave a talk at Cornell this week about being a pedestrian, that my work is kind of really informed by the condition of being a pedestrian, because you're on the street, you encounter people, you can take detours, you really get to sense the atmosphere, you're affected by the elements, and I really want the publications that I produce to have that kind of residue in them, because for me, otherwise I'm just not fulfilling the mandate. I'm not doing the level of storytelling that's necessary. When you're reading a book, you have to read it at many different levels, not just reading the text. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will forever hold a book as a fight. I really love that notion. And I think I want to offer this question. I know, Nancy, when you also presented Where's Africa, you talked about the book not needing to be beautiful in the design, which I thought was also a really kind of profound way of you exceeding, I think, when some people think about the purpose of a designer or a book, it's to and especially when you're dealing with works from the continent or from the diaspora, this kind of desire to let's make it fit within the canon, let's make this just the next chapter of us. And I think your approach to the publication so much so exceeds that in a way where you're so thinking about the content and the context, and going beyond the bounds, which I really love, and I love how you explain that in your own praxis. And I would kind of love to hear Luvuyo, you and G talk about this. And obviously something's coming to mind is the famous Audre Lorde, you can't use the master's tools to undo, to take down the master's house. But Ruth Wilson Gilmore, this amazing abolitionist, says troubles the notion of the apostrophe in master's tools, and thinks about, and I'm going to quote her here because I'm not going to be the one coming for Audre Lorde. I'm going to quote Gilmore, who is the one, and she's also not coming. But she says, things can be torn down and be reconfigured for something else. We can use pieces of what things are made of, and we can make something else. Now I feel people in the audience saying that they know Audre Lorde, the master's tools. Now, in my opinion, Ruth Gilmore's, the most important thing in print when you read the master's tools is the apostrophe between the R and the S. The tools belong to the master. To me, it's a question of ownership and effective control, and the different ways of understanding what ownership and effective control should be. And Nancy, I feel like you beautifully kind of explained how you have just a very precise control over the medium of design and the book, and how you trouble that notion often. But I'd also love to hear G and Luvuyo kind of in your work I'm thinking about archives as something that categorically is something that organizes, categorizes, systematizes, and also closes off. And so thinking about that with Afrophone. And then also Luvuyo, your book does this amazing play where you kind of situate it where in some ways, yes, you're building out a photo archive of Black life at the sea and people speaking to that, but you also kind of completely shift the project where you're like, sure, like I made a counter archive, but I'm also aligning with a liquid archive. So I would love to hear you both kind of talk about how your practices as curators, writers, and makers kind of do this work of taking control of the medium instead of trying to like fill in the gap and be like, let me just continue the canon, but you all are kind of doing something, I think, in excess of it.
And if you want to stop that presentation, you kind of want people to be able to focus. Thanks.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yeah, the kind of archivability of like publications and textual materials, and the kind of, like you pointed out, Nancy, the authority that comes with that is something important to negotiate, and how you want to situate yourself in relationship to authority. I mean, I think in my work outside of like publishing initiatives, a lot of it's been like invested in like oral and embodied cultures, and performance practices, kind of sonic practices. And I often go back to like Diana Taylor's kind of accounting, the performance studies scholar, of like this idea of like the archive and the repertoire, and this relationship between forms of human culture that one could consider the archive, that textual documents, photographic materials that use some form of mechanical registration that seem to have this sense of permanence and can seem to be like operate through a logic of archivability and inscription, and then this like sort of host of other things that Diana Taylor talks about is like the repertoire of like embodied practices, oral practices, and traditions. And I mean, I particularly think about that as someone from like an indigenous Liberian, kind of ethnic identity, who prior to modernity and the arrival of settlers from the Americas, like, but did not have a writing system, and our relationship to texts, nor the codex, the kind of print, the proliferation of print as this kind of primary means through which culture is disseminated. It's a very different relationship. So I identified with this idea that how colonialism kind of creates this epistemological rift between these two categories of experience, embodied and kind of inscripted, sort of textual things. But I mean, a lot of my work is interested in like the fluidity between those two things, and kind of deconstructing that binary and thinking about like the ways in which oral forms of culture have an inscriptive and archival capacities, and do kind of transfer from body to body. And I think so much about publishing is like independent art publishing is about kind of like unlearning the presumed like the ways in which we kind of presume maybe that a publication is divorced from the kind of embodied experience, and so much about the ways in which like people within this kind of context and community are thinking, like in the way that you brilliantly described, of how like the publication is this like publishing is this spatial practice, and things like variations in weight and full and binding and print size and the kind of compositional decision making really transform your experience of like language, I don't know if that, so that's kind of how I think about those questions.
Archives. I suppose for the project, starting with the sort of creative aspect, I experienced a lot of access issues, because of course these archives are housed within institutions that already have various barriers that prohibit you from doing any sort of critical work. And I think at that stage, I was really invested in trying to create a counter narrative, and realized that I was hitting a wall that was deliberately placed there to sort of prevent any kind of interventions within those like really fixed archives, which then situate what leisure looks like and determine like the kind of confines of what leisure is. But then I decided to just go back to the site and really just see how like particularly Black people re-articulate leisure in really distinct ways. And when I was in the process of conceptualizing the publication, it was really important for me to make it a meeting point of the sort of various forms of what archive with a capital A is and archive with a capital with small a, the sort of shoebox underneath the bed with photo albums and sort of important documents, birth certificates, et cetera, et cetera. And I think like I was taking the sort of call from Biggie Zizwe Peterson to not necessarily discard those sort of museum and state houses, but to look at the sort of community specifically. And by that, I also mean I had to sort of make room for language to enter. So how do people like speak about various archiving practices through like the spoken word? I had to embrace mythology and how it sort of is another way in which stories about the beach and the ocean are articulated. And then I had to also make space for sort of creative practice to intervene in that. And I was also taking the call from Carlos Amales, Liquid Archives, and Amphibious Histories, which sort of notions us to think of archives as fluid and like unreliable, and that kind of opened things up even more. So what does it mean, especially when I'm sort of tasked to reference and cite, if I engage with someone who is like, well, I dreamt it. And I'm like, well, how do I work with that? And so I really was drawn to the contributors who were really working with the sort of vastness of what archives are. Yeah, hope that kind of answers.
Kennedy, if I can just say about Luvuyo's book, what I find so striking about it is that it actually problematizes how we think about the beach in relationship to South Africa. Because we kind of know the beach in Accra, we know the beach in Senegal, we identify those spaces as spaces where Black individuals, are doing their thing, whether it's recreation, whether it is kind of fishing, whether it's all these other things. But the beach in relationship to South Africa is Cape Town. Mm-hmm. And that beach is not necessarily a site for Blackness or Black joy, And so the resituating us, pointing us to Durban is very important. And also we then start to think about what that what the beach is and what it has done in the history of the nation. And so when you're focusing on these images of the now, we can also kind of read who was allowed to be in certain places, who's not allowed to be in other kinds of places. And I think that's why it's important to study the archive, but also to produce new information, because we can still engage with history through seeing what the residue that is remaining, or those scars are, what's happening now.
Well, I see that we 3 minutes left. I want to open it up very quickly if anyone has any questions that they would like to offer to any of the panelists. If there's anything, feel free to raise your hand, and I don't know if we have microphones, or you can stand up. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you all for your lovely presentations. Those were fantastic. My name is Elizabeth Ajunwa. I am the Library Director at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and so this has been a pleasure to hear from all of you. My question would be, when it comes to the publications that you all are creating and working on, what is, I guess, your hope or goal for who would have access to these materials? And I guess as a librarian, I'm always thinking about access. And so is the hope for your publications to be in institutions and to be, like, what is your goal, I guess, or your hope?
That was the whole sort of the reason why I wanted to make the anthology was precisely to have it circulate in public libraries. My MFA dissertation was circulated in libraries in Durban and KZN. That has always been primarily where I want the publication to circulate, especially because the gallery market kind of creates a really inaccessible way of engaging with my work, and for me that's always been an issue. The work also sits within like a public, prints sit within a public accessible space, and the anthology, at least within the conversation I had with Archive, I really stressed that at least 200 copies are circulated within public libraries, because that's honestly where I kind of encountered publications specifically. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say quickly that my project was totally about like distribution and circulation, and it kind of started with seeing absences and kind of limitations in the US where I live, in terms of like African cultural periodicals. So it was really this hope to sort of like create these points of entry where, yeah, people who work at, you know, museum stores and museum libraries and archives could, you know, purchase these publications. And yeah, and you can find the reading room at the CARA table if you go to the New York Art Book Fair. So and you know, they've continued to have a relationship with the publishers since that project there. So that's been incredibly helpful in kind of creating points of entry for these materials, the materials with the publishers I worked with, to be accessible here in New York.
As a designer, when you work with the publishers, they've got a kind of distribution network, and it's quite difficult to think about where the work is being produced and where the audience is, and like that big gap. How hard is this for publications like this to actually circulate on the continent? But when starting to work on Where's Africa, I actually brought it to CARA because they were starting to think about how to interact with publishers or other platforms on the continent, and you know, other parts of the global south, if those terms are even terms we want to continue using. And so for me, I now don't just think about what commissions I'm going to take. I also think about who are the rest of the partners. Where is this going to be printed? Where, you know, so that the shipping, you know, isn't hellishly expensive, or that the printing is going to be economical. What are the strategies also that we're building into the publication, so it's not hellishly expensive for people to buy, that it's not heavy, so heavy that it's expensive to ship, you know? Some publications cost one thing and then they cost even more in the shipping, and so all of those things are considerations. I'm really excited about Where's Africa, you know, being presented at the African Art Book Fair in Dakar. I think the fair has been postponed now. Yeah, exactly, but until November. But that's a huge win. That those things don't happen, and so I'm looking forward to more publishers getting involved and invested in that conversation. I know G has, you know, we've been in conversation about this as well with other peers, and then again, you know, some of the work originates from the archives in academic institutions, from special collections. And the work should also go into those places. So it sits next to some of that source material, or sit next to publications on other kinds of bookshelves that are speaking about the same thing, but maybe not with as much of a strong connection because of the space between the author and the actual content and context. And then being able to think about other kinds of formats. So right now, we've been working on the promotional graphics for this publication. There's a key question in every single interview in this document. So part of the marketing strategy is to send those questions out over social media, so that everybody is engaging with the questions, even if whoever can access, you know, social media and is kind of following can access some of this language. And you know, you saw at the Afro Book Fair that some of the things from our publications end up on T-shirts, end up as postcards, end up as etc., so that it can be iterative. A publication doesn't have to be this finite coffin for the content. That's at least my approach.
Thank you all so much. I know there's another classroom session right after this, but thank you all for coming. And again, CARA and Archive, we're at the fair. So thank you. And thank you all. Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Kennedy.
No, thank you all. Okay, where else?
Are you guys going back into the fair?
Huh?
Are you going back into the fair?
Yeah, I'm gonna get some food. Yeah, and then I gotta go.
Okay.
You didn't realize that I had to speak for 8 minutes. I was like, that's it. You were like, so short.
I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Congratulations.
I feel so bad. I feel like I was so quick.
No, it was. I mean, it was all. The times were made up by me. Time is like. I'm sorry. Well done. That was really good. I was just. Yeah. But
the master.
Yeah, you can just share it with them.
I think.
I'll sit on the side and introduce, and then maybe just in order. Oh, this way you can see them.
Or you can just like quietly
Pinch you.
yes, squeeze my ear.
Yeah. She has to go. What? Okay. Where are you going?
You can't be an hour late. You know that's like a friend request when you're like, you have to be a very good friend. Yeah.
I found a thing. No. How do you tell a nuclear crowd from a non-nuclear crowd? Is it like a clicky clicker? Or do we just use? Oh, so we just like press it.
So this is the computer that's connected. So if you can just like download this full slice on this, and then everything will just be. Or you can connect that to this. Amir?
Can we share it with a certain email here, or?
Do you want me to just swap out, or is that a bit of a...
We'll swap it out. I got one. Don't worry about it. Thank you. Good. You want a water? Oh, cool. Thank you.
Charge.
Wait, where are the first two?
I need to connect to the internet.
There's no intros. Basically like a stream. You've done this before. This is not your first rodeo.
Oh, you just have to get that on the internet?
Is it long enough? Shit.
Oh, is it gonna die?
Yeah, my tab.
Can we use Lovely's computer?
Actually, it's charging through
Okay.
the USB-C there.
Is it on the internet yet?
No, I'm just connected.
Do we need to be on the internet?
We do because that's not on the page yet.
Ooh, yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, no, wow. I didn't know exactly what this was. Oh, sweetheart.
Hello.
All right. Unprofessional. I mean. We good? Do we swap seats when it is, or?
No, I think we're just gonna
Slink it over.
because we don't have any sound.
Cool.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our classroom talk, How to Make a Bomb. Can you all hear me? Hello. It is such a beautiful day at the 2024 New York Art Book Fair. We're so happy to be here. How to Make a Bomb is a durational gardening project. We are installed right now on the 4th floor of the New York Art Book Fair. Oh, okay. Let's start here. Is that better? Great. Hello. How to Make a Bomb is a project that is currently in a installation on the 4th floor of the New York Art Book Fair. So I hope that after this classrooms panel, you will all enter the New York Art Book Fair and enjoy it. How to Make a Bomb is a durational gardening project started by artist Gabriella Hirst and curated by Warren Harper. The project centers on a rare species of garden rose, the Rosa floribunda, the atom bomb, as a means to examine the structural connections between horticulture, state power, and nuclear colonialism. In 2023, this project made its debut in the United States, which inspired the How to Make a Bomb art book created by myself under my imprint, Passenger Pigeon Press. All of this collaboration was made possible under the Atomic Terrain Collective, which was started by nuclear policy researcher lovely Umayam. Yay! Just very quickly, a little bit about all of us. Gabriella Hirst is to my left as an artist. She was born and grew up in, I actually don't know how to say that, Camerigaland, which is now Sydney, or now known as Sydney, Australia, and is currently living in between Berlin and London. She works primarily with moving image, sculpture, performance, and with the garden as a site of critique and care. Gabriella's recent projects have been exhibited and commissioned by the Kunsthal, well, how do you say that? Osnabrück. I didn't know that. Cool. Focal Point Gallery in the UK, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. Warren Harper, to Gabriella's left, is a curator and researcher currently based in Toronto, Canada. He received and completed his PhD at Goldsmiths University of London, where his curatorial research project explored Essex's role in Britain's nuclear story. Warren has worked with and held positions at various galleries and institutions across the UK, Canada, and the US. He is also a member of the Plum, an ad hoc collective of artists, writers, and curators based in Toronto. Lovely Umayam is a nuclear non-proliferation researcher and writer with experience in government, non-government, and academia. She is the founder of Bombshell Toe Policy and Arts, a creative collaborative using arts and cultures to share nuclear policy and history. Lovely's creative and policy work have appeared in the New York Times, Associated Press, Newswire, South by Southwest, Wired, Pioneer Works, among others. I am Tammy Nguyen. I'm an artist. I'm the publisher of Passenger Pigeon Press, and some of the books could be found at the Watson Library at the Met, the MoMA Library, and the New York Public Library. I'm going to hand it over to Gabriella Hirst to tell you all about the atom bomb.
Should I swap? Yeah, let's take over.
Hi. So thank you so much for coming. My name's Gabriella Hirst. I'm going to talk to you today about my project, How to Make a Bomb, a work which I began in 2016, joined in collaboration by Curator Warren Harper in 2018, and now interpreted in an artist book, How to Make a Bomb, by Tammy Nguyen, in context of our research group, Atomic Terrain. Before I start, I wanted to pause for a moment on this word bomb. I want to recognize that the language used in this project, in this presentation, holds a specific weight at the current moment, given the relentless bombing of Gaza, that perhaps it wouldn't have in exactly the same way in previous years. The project is in many ways about the complications of language, how words and names such as atom bomb can slip in context from being armed to being playful, and back again as contexts change. I'm working through this, I'm listening, and if my work within this terminology at this current moment feels flippant now, I hope the story that I'm going to tease out will hold some space for this flippancy with criticality and care. So, as I said, I began this project in 2016, but I want to return to a different year, to 1953. 1953 is the year that Britain proposed a deal with the then Australian government to commence work on a nuclear test site at Maralinga, South Australia. These tests were arguably a show of might by a nation vying to be considered a nuclear superpower against the rapid loss of its colonial territories following World War II. Britain's empire was shrinking, and its position as a global power now depended on its ability to declare itself a nuclear state through the development of its own nuclear arsenal. In 1953, Australia had not been a British colonial territory for more than 50 years, and it was under no direct obligation to assist in Britain's nuclear power struggle. Nevertheless, the Australian government of the day gladly offered up a vast portion of mainland territory for British weaponry testing. The Australian Supply Minister Howard Beale stated in 1955, "England has the know-how, we have the open spaces, much technical skill, and a great willingness to help the motherland. Between us, we should help to build the defences of the free world and make historic advances in harnessing the forces of nature." Maralinga, the chosen site at the edge of the Western Desert, had previously been declared by European pastoralists as too arid for the cultivation of wheat and other imported crops, and thus without value. Much of Australian territory has been treated without value because imported plants and animals have not thrived in this unfamiliar environment. Much has been written off as a bad garden. That the traditional owners of the country, the Anangu, had sustainably stewarded this vast terrain for tens of thousands of years prior to European invasion in 1788 suggests that the European pastoralists may instead have just been bad gardeners, attempting to cultivate plants and livestock that were unsuitable and unsustainable for this particular environment. You could say that by the 1950s, the British state had a firm opinion of itself as a globally superior gardener. Since the 1700s, they had been gardening large swathes of the warmer regions of the planet through monocultural plantations in programs of economic botany aimed at filling colonial Britain's coffer. Domestically, during the 1800s, English gardening took the form of the privatization of vast swathes of common use public land via the Acts of Enclosure. English gardening, with its focus on dominance over nature, saw rivers diverted and huge trees planted just slightly to the left to produce an idealized vista for wealthy landowners as part of the Great British Landscaping Movement. With all this gardening experience under its belt, by 1953, if Britain decided a portion of land that was actually a carefully managed ecosystem was really instead a wasteland that would be best used as a nuclear weapons test ground, they felt more than entitled to do so. So between 1952 and 1963, Britain tested 12 atmospheric nuclear bombs on so-called open spaces, indigenous land in Australia, one of which was twice the size of that which was dropped on Hiroshima in 1945, and by doing so, firmly secured its position as a global power once more. The Maralinga story is one of traumatic, enduring displacement, of poisonous black mists, cross-continental fallout, the use of service people as human guinea pigs, secrecy, and the poisoning of country, all to the ends of producing the most destructive weapons that have ever existed. These areas were left so thoroughly contaminated with plutonium-239 that to this day they remain too dangerous to spend extended periods of time within. And of course, to this day, these weapons and others developed by nuclear states during this era continue to be proliferated to wield immense global power. And I'll let Lovely talk about that a bit more. I want to return to the year 1953. In this year, on the other side of the world from Maralinga, in northwestern Germany, another case of pastoral dominance, the bending of nature to anthropological will, was presented to the world, albeit to a much smaller and more specific audience. Raimar Cordes, a third-generation rose breeder of the Cordes family rose nursery, launched a new variety of rose, a medium red Floribunda. The rose was registered with the name Rosa Floribunda Atom Bomb and released onto the ornamental plant market. So before I continue, I'll offer a very brief explanation of botanical and horticultural plant naming as best I can. The dominant system of plant naming follows the Latin binomial system developed by Carlos Linnaeus in response to the mass influx of plants brought into Europe as part of the expansion of European empires in the 1700s. In the Linnaean system, the two-part scientific name is part A, genus, i.e. Rosa, and part B, species, Floribunda. If the plant is a cultivar, that is, a plant that has been cultivated and patented as a new unique strand within that plant species, the plant will also be given a cultivar name. Cultivar names are often part of a marketing strategy. They promise California sunshine or elegant snowdrops from a plant that when you buy it might just be a stick in some soil or a shriveled bulb. They also sometimes are commemorative or personal, recalling famous gardens, reigning monarchs, or beloved family members of plant breeders. For many years, I've been researching, collecting, and then growing cultivar plants of a specific niche, varieties that have been named after episodes in military and warfare history. There are, surprisingly, many of these. For example, Rosa Verdun, named in 1918 in France after the World War I battle, or Daylily Preemptive Strike, registered in 2011 in USA. I've been growing these as part of a project called Battlefield in the community gardens of the Tempelhofer Feld in Berlin and at the Kunsthalle Osnabrück. I'm interested in these plants as small, amateur, individually tendable monuments to big and often uncomfortable histories. For me, tending to these cultivar varieties named after violent events has been a kind of embodied, durational way to explore cultures of remembrance. And more broadly speaking, to better understand how language, or how Western history, is gardened, archived, and maintained. It was through this project that I came across the cultivar called Rosa Floribunda Atom Bomb. This plant, more than any of the others, stopped me in my tracks. I was intrigued. Why would anyone name a plant after such a terrible destructive weapon? And what questions and sentiments would come about through the process of growing and tending to such a plant myself? So far, I haven't been able to find out any hard and fast info why Cordes gave his newly created rose such a contentious name. Cordes was a gardener and a businessman, a West German civilian in a disarmed, divided nation during the heating up of a Cold War. There was, in the 1950s and 60s in Europe and the USA, a type of atomic mania, a nuclear utopianism, which trickled into pop culture and commercial product marketing. Consider the swimsuit, named after the Bikini Atoll tests. It seems that it was within the spirit of this trend that the Rosa Floribunda Atom Bomb was named. It was, after all, marketed as having a color that, and I quote, would strike the eye like an atomic flash. Eventually, the 50s and 60s commercial atomic mania subsided, perhaps as customers became more cognizant of the actual horrors of nuclear weapons. And so the atom bomb rose only had a short market success before it subsequently fell from commercial popularity. It's now almost impossible to find. let alone it's now almost impossible to find, let alone to purchase. It's no longer stocked in any rose nurseries internationally, not even in Australia, where it was officially introduced in 1955, while simultaneously actual nuclear weapons were being brought into the country. Today, the atom bomb rose is registered as growing in only 4 botanical collections globally. In stark contrast to actual nuclear weaponry, the atom bomb rose as a species is arguably close to extinction. I was, however, very lucky, and the Finesci Gardens in Tuscany, one of these 4 collections, in 2014 offered to graft me a plant from the single rose that they had in their garden. 2 years later, in winter 2016, I finally received my single atom bomb rose as a bare root plant. I planted it into my London share house garden and hoped that I wouldn't immediately accidentally kill it. I decided that to safeguard against this, I needed to learn how to propagate more specimens from this single rose. And so I, through trial and error, eventually learnt the process of grafting roses through tea budding, also with the help of an established rose breeding company called David Austin Roses. Tea budding involves taking a small bud of the cultivated rose that you wish to multiply, in this case the atom bomb rose, and grafting it into the neck of a host rose. This is the terminology, which is usually a so-called species or wild rose. A T shape is sliced into the bark of the host rose, which is prized open, revealing the tender inner cambium layer below. The cleaned bud is slotted into this wound and is encased in a protective layer of latex or raffia. Slowly over months, the bud grafts to the cambium layer of its host, whose bark scars and calluses around it. In the following winter, the branches of the host are cut away so that the atom bomb bud can take over and use the roots of the host species to support its growth. In this process, the bud plant is effectively a parasite. And so, through the enactment of this process, began the project How to Make a Bomb, the primary activity of which is the creation of more atom bomb roses from this single reborn relic of the 1950s variety. The aim has been to reintroduce this species into the rose beds of the British garden, distributed throughout the UK, to dig their roots into British soils, soils that so far have avoided contamination with any actual nuclear weaponry that the British state has detonated and deployed around the world. This distribution has been enacted through planting ceremonies, guerrilla grafting, and most importantly, through recruiting other civilian atom bomb gardeners through participatory How to Make a Bomb rose grafting workshops and publications. Workshop participants may plant their own self-produced atom bomb roses wheresoever they wish. If one does not have a garden of one's own, there are countless public and private gardens in the UK where an atom bomb rose may surreptitiously be planted. Since 2018, the How to Make a Bomb project has been based at the Old Waterworks in Southend, in collaboration with curator Warren Harper. And we have, year by year, been developing our stock of atom bomb roses against a backdrop of ever-fluctuating global nuclear arms tensions, armament, and anxiety. Locating the propagating process here is significant due to the Old Waterworks' proximity to Foulness Island, a low-lying land mass at the mouth of the Thames estuary, and the site where Britain's first atomic weapons, those that were bound for testing programs in Maralenga, were assembled for departure. Warren will talk more about our collaboration and its reception after. The project has been a vessel for me to really unpack what it means to garden, in both a direct hands in the soil way and in an expanded, abstracted geopolitical sense, Britain's gardening of the world, or even the nuclear gardening and pruning of an atomic material. For me, tending to and grafting to the atom bomb rose over time is a process incorporating both care and a degree of violence and control. Pruning a rose to make it grow the way you wish, pulling out surrounding weeds. With its name-carrying histories of gung-ho marketable nuclear mania, I also realized that in gardening it, I am gardening a very ugly history. A history whose traces continue to live on, in the plutonium in the soil at Maralenga, and in the weapons proliferated worldwide. I find that the pace of gardening, the atom bomb rose, the slowness, the sort of odd emotional connection that one can develop for a plant, can hold space for these contradictions. It may seem obvious to say that to garden is inherently political, inseparable from homeland and country, and often to nationhood and territory, rooted soils and travelling seeds. There are so many wonderful artists and thinkers who show the ways in which this is apparent. I think today especially of Vivian Sensor's heirloom Palestinian seed bank. These seeds and the relationship with culture and land spread around the world, seeds of resistance and survival. When I come to roses specifically, I'm quickly drawn to stories and symbols of military conquest and Western expansionism. These recur alongside references to romantic love, passion, bread and roses, etc. The rose, there are multiple different examples of this, but I'm going to cut it down because I think I'm going quite far on time. But for one that I'll stick to, just consider that the rose is the floral emblem of modern nation states, some of them being nuclear states, including England and the USA. I wonder if this connection between the rose and performances of state power have something to do with the development of the rose. Roses are one of the most cultivated ornamental plant species in existence. They have been managed through selection and crossbreeding for thousands of years and across multiple territories. Over this time, modern garden roses' form has been entirely altered. Wild roses have blooms that are flat with open petals. Over many, many generations, they have been altered into the development of tight ball shapes or pointed shapes, the emphasis being on the production of layers of petals. These shapes restrict the access of bees and to their flowers' stamens, which contributes to making these plants reliant on humans for reproduction. For me, there is something in the fact that empires and powerful nations have chosen as their floral symbol, their garden envoy, a plant which is the result of so much heavy domination and manipulation. A many-petaled red rose is in some ways the symbol of an ultimate yielding subject, twisted into form and colour as testament to the power of the gardener. A plant not as a symbol of dominance, but as a representation of the gardener's power to dominate. In the USA, when Ronald Reagan proclaimed that the red rose would be the national flower of the USA in 1986, he drew upon an artillery of symbolic associations attached to the rose. He said, "More than any other flower, we hold the rose dear as a symbol of life and love and devotion, of beauty and eternity. For the love of man and woman, for the love of mankind and God, for the love of country, Americans who would speak the language of the heart do so with a rose." With this specifically troubling statement in mind, when Lovely invited Warren and I to bring How to Make a Bomb to the States, it seemed obvious that our participation should involve bringing an actual atom bomb rose to United States soil. After all, the USA is the second most nuclear-armed nation globally and clearly has a deeply rooted cultural, romantic, and political attachment to roses. I had presumed that bringing the atom bomb rose from the UK to the USA would be fairly straightforward, given that the Floribunda species, if not the exact atom bomb rose cultivar, has been growing in most US states for over 100 years. Not so, we rapidly learned. The USA seems to have a military-grade defense against the import of roses specifically into its soils. The import procedure is a process laden with risk assessments, contaminations reports, and threat analysis. It has involved having our rose plants in Essex inspected, and if declared pest-free, issued a phytosanitary certificate, procuring soil analysis tests, a USA plant import permit, a plant passport, pre-warning the plant import facilities of our plants, then sending them stems of atom bomb rose to authorized nursery to root the cuttings and keep them in quarantine for the required 2 years, after which, if the rose shows no defects and if any sprout, our atom bomb rose will be declared low risk and released into the USA. I do recognize and understand the need and value of stringent import measures when it comes to protecting endemic ecosystems and the colonial implications of plant travel. But I've been assured by various plant experts, including invasive species specialists, that there are almost zero risks or pest threats involved in the importation of this plant if it's treated properly. So these restrictions are frankly baffling. There is, however, a loophole in the imports process, which seems to be mainly used by newlyweds wishing to bring marriage bouquets home from destination weddings abroad. Bunches of cut flowers, including roses, may be carried into the USA, given that they are pest-free and declared at customs. These rose stems can then be used in grafting to produce more roses. If, according to the 1985 proclamation, for the love of God, for the love of man and woman, and for the love of country, Americans who speak the language of the heart do so with the rose, maybe I could take advantage of Reagan's own brand of state-sanctioned heteronormative romance in the form of a wedding bouquet to help me bring the atom bomb rose into the United States. And so last year, in Essex, I prepared my own bouquet of atom bomb roses from our arsenal at the Old Waterworks. Despite the fact that I was arguably doing things entirely by the book, I felt extremely anxious going through security in both airports, something that I'm still unsure has to do with transporting plant matter or the fact that I was carrying an object titled atom bomb in an international airport. The bouquet was cleared at customs, and at a workshop at CARA last year, we grafted these onto heirloom American cultivated varieties of rose: American Legacy, American Pillar, Memorial Day, State of Grace, Living Easy, and Torch of Liberty. This year, we continue to graft more roses from a successfully taken atom bomb rose from last year's workshop in the Passenger Press Project space across the road, as we launched Tammy's absolutely wonderful artist book made in response to the How to Make a Bomb project in its USA iteration. I think I've spoken a lot, and so I'm going to pass it over to Warren, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shep, and thank you everyone for coming by. I really appreciate it. So I just wanted to, I guess, give some context of the kind of public moments that we produced for the project in Essex in the UK. So at the time, I was director of the Old Waterworks, which is an artist-led charity in Essex, in Southend-on-Sea, which is in close proximity to Foulness Island. And this building here you see is this kind of really nondescript building is where the Britain's first atomic device was assembled before being sent to Australia. It's in the Atomic Weapons Research Establishment, which closed around the mid-90s on Foulness Island, and is where a lot of the nuclear-related work happened across other sites in the UK. But this one is distinct in that it's the first, the last site before it kind of made its journey to Australia. So the Old Waterworks, I think, something which is important for this project as well is in that the Old Waterworks was focuses still on sort of artist research and development, publishing being a kind of key part of that. So hence the kind of bookshelves here in the library that we hold there. And again, this has grown a lot since I've left and since this photo was taken about 3 years ago. But one of the other areas we have is a garden where we produced this commission here alongside one of the many iterations that we've had with the project. So this is where all the atom bomb roses live outside the Old Waterworks. The middle one that you see in the centre in that photograph is the mother plant. So that's the one that actually came from Italy. And all the others that surround the mother are the various generations of atom bomb roses that we have grafted over the past 5 years. So these have all kind of taken on different sort of trajectories in their own right, sort of been given away, been taken by those that graft them, and sort of stay here until they're kind of, I guess, utilised in one way or another for various parts of the project, like public moments for the project. One of them being this commission that Gabriella produced in 2021 for Estuary Festival, when this was called An English Garden. And this was in Gunners Park, which is in a former Ministry of Defence land. It's now a nature reserve, and it is very close to Foulness Island, so we had this kind of proximity to the site that we were thinking with and considering in relation to the How to Make a Bomb project. And it's also nearby the barge, or the pier where the barge came to pick up the atomic device before it made its journey. On this sort of contemplative, reflective garden was this plaque, which is integral to the work, that kind of reflected upon Britain's history, nuclear history, its role in kind of, I guess, global nuclear colonialism and the impact of further investments on, the development of nuclear weapons and their maintenance today. And unfortunately, during this, really quite carefully considered and reflective piece that Gabriella, thought quite carefully about, it was unfortunately during the festival or just thereafter forcibly removed by some disgruntled conservative councillors who took issue with the sign because they didn't like the fact that we spoke about history and said that, Britain is a nuclear colonial state. It's a nuclear colonial state. It's still investing in violence over care. It's still, very much. It's very much present. It's not a historical, a historical kind of been and gone situation. And the argument was that it's we were colonial. We are nuclear, and they unfortunately said that this beautifully produced garden was a far left-wing attack on our government, our history, and our democratically elected government, was their argument. But nevertheless, it's kind of actually been a kind of blessing in disguise in many ways, because it's allowed us to kind of really share the project a lot more and given it more of a platform. So thank you so much, Conservative Councillors of Essex. And as a part of this, we have the I'll just kind of skim through a few others. The English Garden book, which came. It was like a two-part commission. The garden. This book is, sort of beautifully produced by a London-based design collective called Design Print Bind, and it has a lot of the research that Gabriella spoke to within the pages of this book, as well as some really beautiful drawings that Gabriella has produced. And we may have a couple more upstairs in the passenger pigeon press. We've got a few more, but they've been doing quite well. So if you want one, full floor P4. Other iterations have been kind of exhibitions. So we've shown it at Focal Point Gallery as a consequence of the removal of the garden. We were going to show parts of the project in a group exhibition, and it kind of foregrounded to us the importance of doing some more work to kind of expand upon and speak about and speak to the issues that the project kind of explores. So we exhibited some of Gabriella's drawings in these sort of configurations of her frame drawings in certain configurations, and held a how to make a bomb workshop out in the public square, where we gathered a group of local people and grafted 50 roses and gave them away. And it was a really nice moment to kind of I guess share the project after such a kind of difficult situation that we found ourselves in during an English Garden. And this is Gabriella giving that workshop. But one of the things I didn't actually include here was a conference that we also organised with various folks, called the Rose Garden Conference, that also kind of expanded upon and reflected on the various facets of the project, working with nuclear test veterans and with Indigenous folks from Australia and historians and other artists. And it kind of expanded the project and kind of gave it a lot more sort of richness and context, and it was a really nice moment for the project. And now we're in the US, and it's continuing. So and thank you to Lovely for that. It's been amazing, and for Passenger Pigeon Press producing this book. But we just wanted to give you that sort of further context of the project. And I'll leave it there. I'll say it to Lovely.
No, this is just, I only have one slide. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. I'll try to make it quick so that we have a Q&A and discussion. But I come into this collaboration in a very different vantage point as someone who learned about nuclear weapons from government and non-government work. And in my field, our unit of analysis is the nation state. And I think that for you, the public, nuclear weapons are articulated in that way when you look at news, cable TV headlines, whatever, the potential or emerging arms race between US, Russia, China, the thinly veiled Russian threats as it continues to invade Ukraine. And even though that unit of analysis, the nation state, is very useful, that's how we define and facilitate how we operate in the world, it's also very exclusive by design. Foreign policy happens there, never here. You don't really get to appreciate how war, conflict, impacts the body or the environment. A lot of the jargon, the policies, the postures that we use in a nuclear policy field feel too technical and inaccessible to everyday people, even though real people are being affected by it. And I guess what I wanted to say here is, and the reason why I invited, these beautiful, brilliant people to the United States, is I feel like How to Make a Bomb as this gardening project breaks that down and allows for a different entry point where you're learning about nuclear policy from the ground up, because the unit of analysis that you're using is different. I mean, yes, you still think about it from the context of the UK and nuclear testing in Australia, and they also tested, the British government also tested hydrogen bombs in Kiribati. I mean, nation states are still main characters in this story, but the framing of learning about it through a rose, I think, is poetic, it's reflective, and I think it's also really rigorous. And as someone who's in a nuclear policy space, I talk to a lot of folks in Washington, D.C. all the time. We sometimes get really insular in our work and forget how to talk differently. And so this is the reason why I created Atomic Terrain, which is the larger collective that brought not only them here, but also, pulled in Tammy as like a really good friend of mine who makes these beautiful books. Atomic Terrain also includes ecologists, anthropologists, other nuclear policy experts that I've convened, and we have these roundtables together to just talk about the different definitions of security, the different definitions of peace, because when you talk to a nuclear policy expert about what peace and security means, it's very different when you're talking to an environmentalist, right? Because the temporal scales, the spatial scales are different. So Atomic Terrain attempts to kind of complicate and confuse it a little bit, but hoping to create a community that allows for different types of nuclear storytelling. And just really quickly here, as part of this journey to the United States, I hope that Atomic Terrain and the Atom Bomb Rose begins to tell the story of the United States and the US nuclear policy here. I'm realizing that not a lot of people know about the environmental impacts of the Manhattan Project, for example. We saw Oppenheimer, like that was like a big blockbuster film, but it didn't really make space as an art piece to talk about uranium contamination or nuclear testing. So for example, this picture on the right is an abandoned uranium mine in Monument Valley in New Mexico. Monument Valley, for those who are rock climbers or hikers, beloved national park here. We mined uranium from that land, which is Navajo land. And currently there's more than 500 abandoned uranium mines that have to be cleaned up. And it's not something that, unfortunately, we've been able to prioritize. The Obama administration started cleaning this up but because it's so highly bureaucratic, I think we've only cleaned up about 200, I believe, and there's many more work to be done in that regard. And then to the left is a picture of the Nevada test site. So the United States tested over 1,000 nuclear weapons on US soil and also outside territories like the Marshall Islands. And currently, frontline communities that have been affected by nuclear testing are fighting for expanded compensation for what happened to them. There's this legislation, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, that is currently, I believe, in the Senate, or the Senate hasn't actually passed it yet. It's actually in danger of sunsetting if they don't do something about it now. So it's really interesting that there's these environmental facts, in environmental histories that tie nuclear weapons in a very local way, but the nation-state narrative doesn't allow for that kind of reflection. And so what we're really hoping with How to Make a Bomb as a book and also an exhibition space is to provide that space to think about it. And I would also say, think about the bigger questions, not only nuclear, but just foreign policy in general, thinking about what is the global citizens' role in understanding and changing foreign policy. Gabriella's work with the Rose has really made me think about why do we connect achieving peace or security to inflicting violence? And that's not just nuclear violence, it's violence that's also happening right now. And I think it's a good time to have these kinds of spaces to talk about this, to read, to grieve, to discuss. And I really hope that our exhibition space is an opportunity for you all to do that. I'll end it right there and go on, Tammy.
Yeah. So I started Passenger Pigeon Press in 2016 as a pursuit of nuance. I've been making artist books for a really long time, and my interest in artist books and a lot of the interest that I have in my work stems from the question of reading. How do you engage an audience in reading nuanced materials? How do you engage an audience in reading materials that they don't know about and that they don't relate to and they may not be necessarily interested in? How do you engage people in the process of reading when subjects are so complicated? And I think that's why I'm so excited every single year about the New York Art Book Fair, is that it is a community, a festival, a celebration of artist books, which through the artist book format offer so much more than just the book. My kind of philosophy in thinking about the artist book is that it's a science of spines. It's not just a spine. The artist book allows you to agitate the forms of books through many different artist book making processes. And for me, how you combine spines opens up this opportunity for learning about different narratives and subjects through the process of play and the presentation of simultaneity. And I think that this particular book and this particular narrative has so many layers to it. It's got the layer of gardening, it's got the layers of nuclear history, it's got the layers of nation state, and then it aims to agitate what those meanings are. So this very modest artist book, you can go to the next slide too, is made with a piece of paper. It is one piece of paper that connects other 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. So if you see here, I'm just folding it out. It's just a poster sheet. And by cutting it out, I've added 3 new spines to it. And these 3 new spines are connected with staples. And they now have this opportunity to show the simultaneous movements of Lovely's navigation through nuclear history, Gabriella's navigation through customs and through history, and also our possible navigation through the body of the atom bomb Rose through the process of grafting. Another thing, you can go to the next one too. These artist books and zines were all handmade, and there were 250 made for this fair. And I've been thinking a lot about how, there's so much power in small. There's so much power in the small edition, and I think it relates a lot to some of the themes that have been kind of underneath all of our conversations today, which is that it's this theme of how do you pass on these stories, right? Well, I think that the zine, because they can be exchanged through gift giving, through trading, these are works of art that are made through very humble means. They have this incredible power to actually spread these very complicated stories through friendship and play. Just go to the next one. I think this is our presentation on the 4th floor of the New York Art Book Fair. It is a space to read. It's a space to hang out. It's a space to enjoy each other. At 4 o'clock today, Gabriella will be grafting an atom bomb onto a variety of American species of roses. We've got 3 kinds. We've got 4th of July, Memorial Day, and American. And you can come hang out with us and learn about how to graft and create a bomb. And if you're not just doing that, you can also just pull from the So there's the atom bomb rose right there. We've got one alive in a beautiful pot. There's some grafting knives right there. And if you go to the next one, that's we've created a dirty library of books covered in soil, but all of these books are books that have surrounded our explorations in this history. These are books that have been curated by Warren, Gabriella, and Lovely, and they are about nuclear histories. They include documents from different public domains. They also include fiction. They also include, that particular book has awesome cyanotypes of different flowers and plants that have been affected by nuclear histories. And I welcome all of you after this panel to come on over and hang out with us for the rest of the day. Thank you. I don't think we have any time, or we've got 5 minutes for questions. That's cool. I can't believe it. That's cool. Any questions?
When are we going to do one here? Or would you give us advice how to do one here?
Yeah, I would be up for that, would you? Yeah. Yeah, so it happened through COVID, so it was completely online, the festival, but it was kind of site specific in its content in that we did have, the focus was on Australia and the UK predominantly, so we had sort of met, the chair of the British Nuclear Veterans Test Association, or Test Veterans Association, and other folks, but it was online. It's still online now, so you can check it out. Yeah, it's called the Rose Garden Conference. If you just type in how to make a bomb, the Rose Garden Conference. What's that?
We should do one physically.
Yes, that'd be amazing. Yeah. Yeah, but I'd love to kind of do something similar to sort of shift the context and consider a different place for sure. Like I think there's. Yeah. I love this brainstorming. It's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege to hear this perspective and to bring art and gardening into our nuclear history. I know you up there know this, but many people in the room will not know that on 20th Street, there was the Baker and Williams warehouses where I think it was 1,200 tons of uranium was stored for the Manhattan Project, just 2 blocks away, on the same block as an elementary school. So we have nuclear history everywhere. My name is Kathleen Sullivan, and I'm with NICAN, the New York Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. We have nuclear maps with us, if you'd like one. I'd like to ask Gabriella, nice to see you, if you and Warren have thought about Derek Jarman's garden and what he did in the UK, and if you have thought about the possibility of planting the atom bomb rose in different places in the UK where radioactive violence exists, like Sellafield and other places. Thank you.
Hi, lovely to see you. I mean, Derek Jarman's garden is such an amazing reference in terms of like healing and survival and the nuclear landscape. I mean, I guess at this point, really, with where we plant the roses, is we just kind of follow people's leads. We get invitations to send roses to places, and then that's where they kind of end up. And I'm enjoying it like that. I feel like there's a kind of like being asked to place it there in the right setting feels like the right thing to do at the moment. But yeah, I mean, of course, I would like to. But the focus has been on, I guess, yeah, like taking these invitations and also like grafting, having the grafting sessions and then letting people kind of take them where they will, rather than like implanting them in specific places where they might become more like monumental. That's my approach, but I still, of course, I mean, it would be incredible to have one at Derek Jarman's garden, although that is, I guess, a different history that I would have to kind of process and think about where that goes. But good question.
I would love to add one in our dirty library. Yes. I think we have two. We still have 2 days. I just a quick plug. Thank you. These are awesome. I just wanted to mention that part of the library, we've printed out the information about the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which I talked about. We have the United Nations Disarmament Yearbook that talks about what the UN does around nuclear disarmament. And so I really invite you all to go and read these primary sources yourself. I think in this day and age, we really depend on experts or pundits on social media to sort of tell us what to think, which I think has its place. But what's really exciting about our dirty library concept is that we want you to explore and see for yourself what the government has said, what activists have said, what other researchers have said. And I really love that invitation for research, because I don't think we have that anymore when we end up talking on TikTok, even though I use TikTok. But anyway, just wanted to thank you for these.
On time?
Yeah, bang on.
So good. That was so much fun.
No, that was really good.
It was amazing to hear both of you speak as well. Just like without anything, without just like go and just like hold the room. Good, done. I know, it's so good. Let's go say hi. Because of the mask. Sorry, she like, oh, thank you. Hi.
She is a curator for Jewish. So I met her in church up in
When I saw the write-up,
Test. Test.
But you can probably grab them. Yeah. I'll just read your bio. Can I share my bio? I have the triple canopy bit down. Do you want me to take anything off? Even if you're gonna say, I feel like if you're gonna say that you're in DSA, I should also say I'm in DSA, but maybe neither of us should say we're in DSA. Maybe you should come out. I'll say a wish Rachel is also. Oh my god. It's like it's a secret recruitment push. Oh, it's just like Aaron has a copy of the book or something. I have a copy of the book. Live? You don't have a copy of your own book? I didn't bring it like with me. I'm gonna do a quick intro to the floating opera as requested. Yeah. I don't want to sit like behind Ciarán and Rachel. Things are happening. This is David Senior, the co-organizer of the classroom program. Hi, Rachel. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being part of stuff. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So,
We're going to start the next session in 1 second. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Yeah. Yeah, we're down 9 minutes and I realized. What do you mean? How long will speak for? Like, do we want to talk for half an hour? Maybe we should talk for like 50 to like 45, 50 maybe? So silly. Why are we up here talking about goofy? I guess it's normal. And now I don't know where Oh yeah, you want to switch?
Hi, everybody. Is this working? Hello, hello. Hello. I may have to just borrow your mic and give it back to you.
Testing, 1, 2. Nope.
Test. Oh, maybe just the levels aren't up. It doesn't pick up like inappropriate chatter. Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Is test. Is that good, Amir? Hello. Okay, I think that's fine. It's weird to. Hi, welcome to the third session of the classroom this Saturday. My name is Emmy. I'm the co-organizer of the classroom. And right now we are going to have a conversation between Rachel Himes and Kieran Finlayson, presented by the publisher Floating Opera Press. Floating Opera Press is a Berlin-based occasional imprint. I like the occasional part. started by Aaron Bogart, who's in the audience. It's a publishing that publishes contemporary criticism and artist books. They are on the C38 on the 3rd floor, where you can purchase Perpetual Slavery after this talk. In Perpetual Slavery, Ciarán Finlayson considers whether we have attained a post-emancipation world through extended readings of works by Ralph Lemon and Cameron Rowland. This conversation between author and art historian Rachel Himes and Finlayson will look at the possibility of freedom in the current political context and probe the historical relationship of art to capitalism. Ciarán is the brand new senior editor of Triple Canopy, and he's an editor from Houston, Texas, and is on the core faculty of the Interdisciplinary Art and Theory program in New York, and has taught aesthetics and social theory at Columbia University, New York, the Sandberg Institute, Amsterdam, and at Socialist Night Schools hosted by the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, of which Rachel is also a member. Rachel Himes' research interests emphasize the decorative arts and material culture of 18th and 19th century Europe as sites for the development and promulgation of racial ideology. She is currently in the PhD program at Columbia's Department of Art, History, and Archaeology, and her writing has appeared in N+1 Jacobin and the Journal of Museum Education. Please join me in welcoming Ciarán and Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. I'm really excited to think about this book with all of you and with my friend Ciarán. I don't know, I guess to get started, do you want to introduce the project of the book a little bit? Introduce us to the artists who are present in it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ciarán. Thank you all for coming. I guess also to begin, I just want to I guess dedicate this talk to Marina Vishmit, who commissioned the text when it first appeared about 5 years ago. The book is kind of two case studies or two thematically related essays about the artists Cameron Rowland and Ralph Lemon. Cameron Rowland is a conceptual artist, a sculptor, working mostly in the tradition of the ready-made, and Ralph Lemon's a kind of a conceptualist choreographer who I mostly am looking at work that he made kind of after he kind of ceased making dance for stage and started to make dance for the museum, and to use a lot of kind of like paradance artifacts as in the presentation of choreographic ideas.
Yeah, my first thought upon encountering a framing that brought these two artists together was that there are really obvious rubrics under which their work could be consumed. I mean, they're both Black contemporary artists. They both are artists who draw on, who address, who engage histories of racialized oppression. They both are kind of artists engaging with post-traditions. But I think those are all kind of, in your framing, maybe inadequate ways to consider them together. So my first question in looking at your project is, how did you arrive at a framing that brings Lemon and Rowland together? What unites them, and then what can we learn from an analysis that encompasses both of their practices and reads them against each other?
Sure. So really the thing that attracted me to trying to think the two of them together is that they're both I guess post-conceptualists, which is in some ways is the generic condition of contemporary art, but then I think also in a really particular way, they are both really actively thinking through the legacy, especially of the first generation of conceptual art, and really the kind of the like transformation of the ontology of the work of art after that moment, and its transformation of its social position, of the range of artistic materials available to them, the way that art can make new claims upon society or to engage with it. So they're both thinking really intensely through this like mid-century tradition, but then they're also really using their resources of the conceptual tradition to think about the meaning of freedom after slavery. And they're producing extremely different work, but they're using, I think, a similar set of strategies and a similar probing a similar set of questions. They both take different historical materials. So Roland's work is really, the work that I focused on here is part of a long collaboration that he had with this man named Walter Carter, who was a sharecropper who died at around age 100. Lemon worked with him for about the last decade of his life. And so Lemon's really working in like civil rights, post-civil rights, and then also pre-civil rights sharecropping. It's kind of this like maybe 40s through 60s is the remit of what he's focusing on, so that his historical material, I think, demands a certain set of artistic strategies for dealing with it, and then Cameron Rowland is really making work broadly kind of after mass incarceration, and that there's all sorts of historical, political, like economic changes between these two moments of the Black freedom movement and Black history in America. So Rowland's work, I think, is using the resources of conceptualism to really like ask about finance and insurance and maybe other types of like economic strategies for like thinking through the meaning of freedom today.
Right. So both kind of post-conceptual and both in this ongoing post-moment, like a post-slavery moment, which like kind of title references. Slavery is over, and yet it's not over. The unfree, coerced, otherwise like under duress forms of labor persist. So for me, this is at the heart of the project, these two artists' relationship to different kinds of unfree labor. And I guess to begin with Ralph Lemon's relationship to Walter Carter. So Walter Carter is this former sharecropper, someone who for Lemon describes Carter as being born 50 or so years shy of being a full-time slave. So Lemon is drawn to the ongoing presence of slavery, the almost but not quite having been a slave that Walter Carter represents. And maybe you can speak more to this, but in Lemon's practice, Carter assumes a large significance, and Lemon calls upon Carter to perform these different performative actions, these kind of post-dance actions. He asks him to dig a hole, to smash a ceramic rabbit, these things that are like but not quite work. And as you write, Lemon is drawn to Carter because he feels that Carter represents or is able to enact some kind of pure, natural, and unalienated labor. Lemon is really captured by this fantasy of the natural Black worker that Carter seems to suggest to him, and fascinated by Carter's sort of enmeshment with forms of racialized oppression, sharecropping, slavery. So I found this really challenging to engage with. On the one hand, Lemon is hiring Carter, this figure who sort of brings slavery into the present. On the other hand, this relationship is perhaps exploitative. Lemon's practice depends on Carter in ways that I find hard to understand, I even find them uncomfortable. So I think it's possible to imagine a critique of Lemon's relationship with Carter, but that is not the path that you take in the book. So my question is, what do you think, or how do you read this former sharecropper being present in Lemon's practice? Like, what does Carter represent to Lemon, and what does Carter represent to you in your historical analysis?
Sure. So, yeah, one of the ways that that Lemon is really engaging with the mid-century avant-gardes is he has Carter do a lot of kind of Fluxus style task scores, such as the ones that you enumerated, and then he also has him do things like he kind of uses Carter in some way as like this canvas, and he just throws a bunch of like stuff at the wall, stuff that inspires him, and he kind of sees like artistically what happens when these two kind of like socially dislocated things come together. So sometimes he'll just read to him from like Walter Benjamin's like theses on history, or he'll watch like Solaris with him and have him reenact scenes, or he just does a lot of kind of I think one of the things that he's doing is he's bringing a lot of the resources of the art world, a lot of the art world's like cultural references, and to him, and I think he's also bringing a lot of the kind of like Lemon's from the downtown dance world. I think he's bringing a lot of the like cultural references and cultural resources of like downtown Bohemia and bringing them to Walter Carter, who for the most part just worked really hard, doing like very hard manual labor for like most of his life. He's in retirement now, and so he's able to, and he pays him to do all these things. He gives him like $100 a day to do these kind of like self-consciously like wacky art world tasks. And I do think that one definitely could do a criticism of it, but I do think part of Lemon's whole mode is he's already incorporated the criticism. Like he's written this book, Come Home, Charlie Patton, and so much of the book is his own kind of guilt-ridden, maybe tortured reflections on why, on the relationship with Walter, like artistically what's produced from it, like all these types of things. Then he also kind of overemphasizes and is like quite dramatic about the ways in which Walter is sort of disobedient. Sometimes he pays Walter to do stuff and he won't do it. He'll just like run to the store and get beer with his daughter or something instead. And I think that's also something Lemon finds really kind of productive. I think it also demonstrates to him and justifies the project in some ways that shows that it's not this kind of unilateral relationship. But I think one of the things that is attractive about Carter is this process that's basically ineliminable from modern art, which is that as art turns against itself, it's kind of perpetually has to like seek some sort of like outside resource. Carter just does stand in for that, and sometimes I think Lemon leans a bit like too heavily into it. He has this romance of the South, and he's aware that it's a romance of the South, but sometimes he will speak about it as and somehow being like outside of like even capitalism, which is an absurd statement to make about a sharecropper. I think it's part of the. Yeah, it's part of the dynamic, and so he brings it to like a level of self-consciousness and in the writing about it and in the negotiations with Walter and in the video making. I think
I'm interested in this idea that like Lemon has brought art to Carter. So you see, like Carter spends his whole life working as a sharecropper, like exploitative, degrading form of labor that has like lasted his whole life. And like by the time that Lemon meets Carter is like what, like 90 or something. He's like older. Carter has since like passed away, very old man. But the idea that Lemon has brought art into Carter's life kind of is like a respite or like a vacation even from the other forms of labor. But then again, like, Lemon has enlisted Carter to do a certain kind of work. So we wonder like what kind of work is that? How is it different than the work of sharecropping? And then I guess I'll just leave it there. Like, how are these types of like work differentiated, and how does work relate to art in your analysis?
Sure. I think one other important thing is that he also sees Carter as being this tremendous cultural resource himself. The whole project with Carter began as part of this thing called the Dancing and Dying Tour, where Lemon was traveling throughout the South and finding he was looking for people who knew the old blues dances and old plantation dances, and then he would just try to get them to teach him the dances, and then then he would find the living relatives of different Delta blues legends, and then he would play the music and he would perform the dances that he had been taught before the relatives, and just through talking to people at like different juke joints and stuff, that's how he comes to Carter. And so he has Carter do a lot of dance as well, but Carter's 90 years old, so whenever he does the old dances, he basically just shuffles, kind of no matter what step he's doing. It is the same thing because his body can't do so many things. So there's a way in which he's doing these extremely traditional social dance forms, but they end up looking kind of enormously like Yvonne Rainer or what have you. They end up just becoming these extremely simple gestures that have like a lot of formal resemblance to the type of things that Lemon would have been doing and the downtown scene that he came out of. Could you maybe restate the part of the question?
I guess the broader question I'm interested in here is, I see this as a book that makes specific argument about unfree labor, during slavery, about unfree labor as it persists in society. For example, the labor of the incarcerated that Cameron Rowland's work engages, as in the work that's behind us here. And yet, you have chosen to write a book that is a piece of art criticism. And so I guess the question that I'm really interested in is, why are these works of art, why is the format of art, this post-conceptual art, an appropriate lens through which to engage these histories of unfreedom? What about the status of art, about Lemons making art, about Walter Carter's participation in that art, is an interesting way to engage these questions of labor and unfreedom. Why is it important that we're not reading an essay about unfree labor, past and present? Why are it important that in looking at Carter and looking at Lemon's work and looking at Rowland's work, we engage this through art?
Sure. So yeah, one of the things I guess that one of the freedoms maybe that Lemon is trying to bring or thematizing or troubling with Walter is he's bringing the freedom of the artist to someone whose life has been defined by a very particular historical kind of unfreedom. And he'll have Walter do these things, he'll record them, sometimes he offers to show them to Walter, and Walter says I'm having a good time, I like the work, I don't need to see it. He's not interested in the art commodity version of what he's doing. He does profess to just enjoy something of he's doing this useless work. It's Walter de Maria style, kind of over the top thematization of the artist's freedom, and also the freedom of the socially useless work of art. So yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. And I guess in terms of the question of why an essay or something, I think both of these artists are people who write a huge amount about their work. Lemon has written books about his work. With every Rowland piece, actually I didn't do a good job reproducing this, because every Rowland piece, when you reproduce it, you are supposed to reproduce these block texts that are they're all in the book, but there are these functionally little historical essays that have to be reproduced alongside every image of Cameron Rowland's work. So they're both people who are already producing discourse, making arguments about their own work. And if you did just want to boil the work down to an argument, they are already making the arguments, and they don't actually need art criticism to understand it. It is all kind of textually embedded in it. But one of the things I was thinking of is that so perpetual slavery, the phrase from the book is it comes from a black abolitionist, James McCune Smith, who's writing in 1865. And he thinks one of the things that the end of the war is going to bring, it'll bring the emancipation of capital, which will mean perpetual slavery. And so perpetual slavery is I think it's a very interesting phrase that a black abolitionist was using to describe the post-slavery society, just a society dominated by the emancipation of capital, the predominance of the wage form. So the title, perpetual slavery is a way of thinking about contemporary just capitalist social relations. So I think one of the things that the artists do that's different from what they're doing in their writing is I think they're both posing questions about the present via the historical objects that they're working on, but they're condensing them into objects of artistic experience, and they're doing so using I think institutional resources that are, I think, actually only they're only possible within the field of art, and not really possible within the field of producing an essay. So for Cameron, for this work, for instance, Disgorgement is it's a set of Cameron Rowland had Artist Space, a nonprofit, purchase these shares in the insurance company Aetna that profiteered from, or that formerly insured slavers, kind of at the start. So a lot of their funds presumably are this originary accumulation from the era of slavery that has become tremendous profits for them. So the shares are purchased, and then at some point when there is any federal commission to study or establish a commission to distribute reparations, the profits from these shares will then they'll be paid out. They'll go to whatever this federal organization is, and then they presumably they will be paid out to the descendants of slaves. And so there's a way in which the work is itself, it's both a commentary on something, but it is itself also actually doing it. It's built into the form. Like, one thing that you can do in art after conceptualism is you can make the contract a work of, like, it becomes an artistic medium, and then just when the historical conditions for the realization of this work happen, it actually does it goes into effect, which I think it transforms like a whole set of ideas about what like institutional critique or like what art kind of is or can do, or how art should, like how art's critical relationship to society, I think, is kind of like fundamentally changed by doing something like this. So I think it's like they're because they're both extraordinarily self-reflective, and they're both like very much thinking about institutional critique, that they're able to do this type of stuff that's not simply contained in the discourse about slavery and freedom that's already like literally there in their work.
Yeah, I think what's key here is that both Lemon and Roland have these very active practices. Like, Lemon is actively working on and working with Carter. He is enacting both a relationship of employment, of labor domination to some extent, but he's also showing how that relationship breaks down when he gives Carter the opportunity to do these useless, meaningless, fluxus art world tasks. So there's an active process or interchange between them. And then, yeah, I think you're right. Roland's work is active in that this work, disgorgement, really is holding in itself the possibility, the condition of reparations being paid at some point in the future. It's like really holding that possibility, and I think you're right that really actually, I don't know if it can only happen in art world spaces, but it's hard for me to think of other spaces where someone would have the funds to do this, to purchase, in this case, these Aetna shares that, I mean, the condition that Roland's established here, which I assume these like documents say, is that the worth of these shares will be dispersed as reparations in the future event that federal legislation pertaining to reparations is passed. It's really tied to the real world in that way, and it's hard to imagine a space other than like the art world that would make this like active process possible. And someone could do it on their own, I guess, but like that's, I don't know, it's the contract form, contract art kind of makes that. I'm interested in, I mean, you have in the book one of the final sections of the book deals with reparations, and you're looking at two works of Roland's, this one, Disgorgement, and another work that was in this art space exhibition, which is, this one, National Ex-Slave Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association badges. So you can speak more to what this is, but these are two historical artifacts. They are badges that were worn by members of this Reconstruction era ex-slave mutual aid and reparations association. And I'm really interested in the type or the vision of reparations that is kind of put forward by these. So we have one Reconstruction era object, we have this one sort of very like future-looking disgorgement work that will pay reparations in the instance that Congress passes legislation pertaining to reparations. I kind of wonder, like, what do you see like unfolding between these two works? And then like I'm surprised by this artist's relationship to reparations. I think reparations often has a very like utopian quality. It's kind of, it's all about futurity. It's not necessarily grounded in the real world. It doesn't necessarily hold or relate to the like actual conditions under which reparations happen. So it's just like, what do you see in this relationship to reparations and these, like, I think practical, pragmatic, but also kind of humble engagements with reparations as a discourse or as a possibility?
Sure. So this the Mutual Aid Society that produced these badges was founded by I think Reverend Isaiah Dickerson and Callie H. House, who I guess they one older idea of what reparations would mean or could have meant, especially like from the era immediately immediately following emancipation, had to do with what's owed to older slaves, who were seen as being kind of totally bereft because they didn't. There's no, say, social security. There's no type of social safety net for people who worked their entire lives, received no wage, and then are also there's no plantation for them to like retire on. So the question of reparations was really like an urgent question for what do you do with like the old ex-slave, and so that's what these badges were trying to do. They were raising money. It was both a mutual aid society for people who, like older people who needed like healthcare and such, but it was also they were raising money to pass a bill that would somehow provide provisions for like elderly freedmen, and the bill never actually got off the ground. The particular congressional representative who was ostensibly supposed to pass it, I think maybe like ran off with the money. It never got off the ground. So these are like they're very like humble pot brass badges, and they represent a dream that was like totally scuttled. It was a bill that never actually went anywhere. And then disgorgement is also, it's tied to a bill that is introduced before the House every year, and every year it doesn't pass. They're both kind of like indexed to these failed attempts at passing federal legislation, and in between them stands like the whole long history of the manifold like meanings and different types of social movements that have made claims for reparations. And so this kind of like especially during like the Black Power era, but kind of also Black communists envisioned one form of reparations that involved the Black Belt thesis and ceding all like the Southeast to the United States, and this kind of even became like official like Soviet policy under Stalin. Like there's this whole kind of like varied history that passes between these two things that are installed across from each other in the show. And so one of the things that I was interested in is the way in which Roland's art is like, I do think there is something like kind of, it's very sophisticated in the way that it's thinking about freedom and unfreedom. But I just think that what I found in a lot of the criticism about the work is that I think people read it kind of too straightforwardly or too earnest or something. It was like this is the Times article. It's like this is like it's art. It offers a history lesson in the service of reparations or something. It's very kind of like straightforward in what it's like, how it's achieving what it's doing and what its actual goals are. And I do think there is something kind of like more ironical happening, and I think it's like there's this image of freedom, and there is a way in which the work is actually trying to realize something utopian. I think a lot of the like language around the reparations movement and what reparations is or might mean like is often rooted in these kind of like utopian social schemes or something, but especially it's like entirely the aesthetics of administration. It's entirely mimesis of the administered world, and it is actually like it's on the one hand extremely possible and like kind of like very extremely practically minded and bureaucratically minded, and then on the other hand it's also indexed to something that like has not happened and probably will not happen. At least it probably will not be this bill that like this piece of contract art is tied to. So yeah, I was interested in how he's kind of like negatively positioning these different kind of visionary social movements, but then also in their kind of most like abject, fully administered state.
I find this work, engaged with reparations, really meaningful, precisely because of its like negativity, because of its like non-speculative and non-utopian character. And I think that, I don't know, I think there's like a really pleasurable, like speculative, like catharsis sometimes in both like literary and artistic engagements with reparations. It's kind of, you're invited to like imagine a future society, but